Thanks very much, Adam, for that introduction. And as I begin, I too would like to acknowledge traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge my great mate and Mr. Western Sydney in the audience today, Greg Warren. His connections in Western Sydney, if someone doesn't know Greg, they're not really in Western Sydney, pretty much. George, thank you for your welcome. You're one of the few people who can manage to get Dickens and Marty McFly into a welcome all at once, but we appreciate it. And thank you for your time as Mayor of Campbelltown. I know that the clock is now ticking on that period, but I think you should be proud of your contribution to the city and the lasting impact that will have on its residents of today as well as the residents of the future. So thank you. It's always a pleasure to come and address this audience. In fact, I was just saying to Chris that I think this was or a version of this, I think it had another title, was the first speech I made as Minister last year. So back again, and we'll see how we go next year. But because of the passion and the potential of not only Western Sydney, but particularly of the southwest, and being from Wollongong, it's one that's close to home as well. You saw a series of stats there from Adam, which I won't go over again, but they go to the point that there's an exciting opportunity here on the horizon and a bright future ahead. But if we want to realise this, we need to have a concerted effort by government, by industry and by communities to address the challenges that are before us. Now, you'll all be familiar with some of our early responses to the housing challenge that the government's embarking on the biggest set of systemic and interrelated planning reforms in New South Wales for decades. Now, the bottom line is we need to get more homes built and more keys indoors. We inherited a planning system that was confused and confusing, so we've started to fix it. And I want to acknowledge the fact that Kirsten Fishburn, now not so new, but the Secretary of the Department is here now. She's been doing a power of work in making sure that the department is ready to back in the government's desires when it comes to delivering on housing, jobs and energy generation of the future. The planning system shouldn't be a system that helps us achieve our aspirations, not one that stands in our way. And in the last budget, we allocated just over $250 million to continue the overhaul of the system and implement planning reforms. They've been well documented, 2 tiers of our transport-oriented development program, the first allowing for greater density around 37 stations across Sydney, the Illawarra, the Hunter and Central Coast, expected to help create up to around 170,000 more homes. The accelerated precincts in Homebush, Crows Nest, Bankstown, Hornsby, Kellyville and Bella Vista and Macquarie Park, which are on public exhibition right now, and provide for more than 60,000 new homes, including 6,000 affordable homes at least, and supported by nearly 100,000 jobs. And the first stage of our low and mid-rise housing reforms, which are in place, allowing dual occupancies and semi-detached dwellings on R2 zonings in all but 4 local government areas across the state. Now, 3 of those 4, it was for bushfire and flood affectation. The 4th was because the only R2 zoning was downwind of the sewage treatment plant, so not the optimal place to put more housing. We've also given councils realistic housing targets coupled with league tables of performance, but along with measures on our own performance. We want to track and measure our own performance and make sure that the New South Wales system is performing above and beyond what it's supposed to do as well, making sure that we're transparent and accountable. Over the next little while in the Macarthur region, the 5-year housing targets more than 43,000 homes, with nearly 80% of them in the system already. So while the overall target over the next 5 years does shift the balance of housing to infill development, greenfield development remains an important part of the housing solution. Now, it's not just because there are around 48,000 greenfield housing applications in the pipeline, there's more than 11,000 that are under construction right now. Or even more than that, there's more than 6,000 homes in greenfield sites that were built in the southwest growth area over the last 12 months. It's because communities like the Southwest know that they are part of the housing solution. People want to live in this part of Sydney, and they're willing to do their fair share, but for too long they've been asked to do their share and everyone else's share. Your share, your share, your share. And that's stopped. The innate sense of fairness of people who live in this part of the world, that means that they don't want those free riders who are willing to accept some of the benefits of more housing in Sydney, but just don't want it near them. So while we're focused on increasing the supply of new homes, we're also recognise that there's been a consistent underspend on infrastructure, particularly in the southwest. Under the last government, infrastructure often seemed to be an afterthought rather than a priority. We are unashamedly working to close the gap between when houses are built and when the infrastructure communities need is delivered. Because it's not just about building better homes, we're also about building better communities. And in fact, nearby this morning, the Premier and the Deputy Premier, along with the member for Camden, are opening the long overdue Gregory Hills Public School. The delivery of the new Gregory Hills Public School comes after an enrolment growth audit that found that the previous government neglected the needs of young family and booming communities, failing to adequately plan. The audit found that Gregory Hills and Gledswood Hills recorded the 7th fastest student enrolment growth between 2018 and 2023, with a 145% surge, an increase from 805 to nearly 2,000. Now, the first sod on Gregory Hills was turned in May last year, and in this week, more than 400 students began learning in that suburb's first permanent school. Now, the reason I say first permanent school is for the first permanent school in a suburb that has grown from 38 residents in 2011 to more than 14,000 in 2021. We shouldn't have had to wait until 2024 to have the first permanent school for that community. I think by any reasonable measure, that's simply not good enough. So when we first came to office, industry advocates were calling for reform to infrastructure contributions. So the first piece of planning reform that we did was to have a consistent set of infrastructure contributions across the urban areas from the Hunter through to the Illawarra. A reform recommended by the Productivity Commissioner. That delivers a constant flow of funds to be used for things such as roads, schools, parks and public transport, the infrastructure that community needs. Because if enabling infrastructure isn't there, it not only impedes housing growth, it impedes jobs growth as well. Now, around 20 years ago, I worked in Ingleburn. And at the time, many of today's suburbs were only plans on a map. They are now homes and new communities. They represent the best elements of Australian life. Young families growing up together, sharing their aspirations for their communities and their children. Parents working hard so their children have a better standard of living than their own. And while those last couple of decades have seen significant growth for too long, infrastructure has not kept pace with that growth. It's left a backlog that we're busy trying to address. The recent budget saw significant investment for Western Sydney, including $5.2 billion for better roads, $137.9 million to support the delivery of 6,000 homes in the Greater Macarthur, Penrith, Eastern Creek and Western Sydney area metropolis, and along with $7.2 billion for schools and hospitals. Continuing the Sydney Metro Western Sydney Airport project, delivering 6 new stations to service future Western Sydney International Airport and the Aerotropolis, bus passengers to be connected via the stage 1 of the Western Sydney Rapid Bus project linking Penrith, Campbelltown and Liverpool to the new airport. Road projects including $110 million for the M7 to M12 interchange, nearly $110 million jointly funded for Picton Road upgrades and planning for the Picton Road Picton bypass, and a further $65 million for planning the South West Sydney roads, again jointly funded between the Australian and the New South Wales government. One of the roads that will play a vital role in unlocking homes is Appin Road. Now, Appin Road, that many of you would know, connects southwestern Sydney and with the employment and recreational opportunities in Wollongong as well. It's currently a 2-lane road which needs upgrades. So the road will be widened to 4 lanes progressively, but including underpasses for crossings that will allow koalas and other animals to cross safely. In January this year, Transport for New South Wales approved the design for Appin Road upgrades, including the intersection upgrades, partial road widening and construction to allow those intersections to access Fig Tree Hill residential development. The upgrades will be staged but they've already started with Lend-Lease doing the first part of the work, and the recent budget allocating $10.5 million to the intersection at Appin and St John's Roads. The federal government is providing a further $50 million in funding for upgrades as well. Now, this work is in addition to the State Voluntary Planning Agreement Contributions Program, one established by the previous Labor government, that recently directed more than $26 million to the southwest to repair roads and upgrade them, improve stormwater drainage, create new parks, and improve the local environment. But we've still got things to be alert to, particularly koalas, water and wastewater. Let's start with koalas. Koala habitat and biodiversity protections are the core considerations when planning in Sydney's southwest. Statutory koala corridor maps and other legislative protections accompany new rezonings to preserve and revegetate habitat so koala numbers can grow. In March, we strengthened the environmental protections under the Cumberland Plain Conservation Plan while retaining certainty for local residents and allowing business to invest with confidence. The land earmarked for development under the CPCP would provide up to 73,000 new homes, while also protecting native plants and animals and providing green open space for residents. The plan will help deliver jobs and infrastructure. Rezonings have and will include a suite of koala protection measures that align with the recommendations of the New South Wales Chief Scientist and Engineer. This is in addition to our commitment to establish a new koala national park along the Georges River between Long Point and Appin, which will cover up to 1,800 hectares. On wastewater supply to the Greater Macarthur area, it's also a challenge. For many years, it's not been given the care and attention from government that it deserved. Ultimately, if you can't have a shower and you can't flush a toilet, you can't have a home. It's the simple maths and equation of the situation. People who bought into the dream of living in new release areas didn't expect to be arguing long after the ink was dry on the sales contract to be connected to those basic services. So while land is rezoned, it has progressed to a gateway decision, which it has to do. DAs will not be approved until development controls, infrastructure planning and contribution schemes have been finalised. Now, along with the Minister for Water, I'm closely monitoring progress on this in the southwest and will continue as Sydney Water works to develop the capacity along with my department. With the completion of the Western Sydney Airport due in 2026, it's vital to make sure that the region is preparing. Bradfield City Centre could deliver 10,000 new homes in the coming years with the first super lot already out. But things are far less advanced with a broader Aerotropolis precinct than the previous government spin would have you believe. That's why we've appointed Tom Gellibrand, he's at table 8 if you want to talk to him afterwards, as the state's infrastructure coordinator general. Now, Tom and his team have the authority to solve those roadblocks and disagreements between agencies to maximise the jobs dividend from the Aerotropolis, but also to intervene where necessary to achieve our housing targets and our objectives when it comes to energy generation and renewable energy progress. Infrastructure and its timely delivery are the key to realising the plans for this region. We need to make sure that projects are completed on time and when and where they are needed. Roads need to be finished, schools need to be built and hospitals upgraded. The completion of the Aerotropolis will also bring significant boost to the area. Now, we've listened to how best to do this, incorporating ideas and sensible suggestions. I think that Chris was one of the first to suggest the infrastructure coordinator boost late last year. So we're taking on board those positive feedbacks and looking at options of how we can do things better, because we want to do things better. I look forward to continuing this discussion and hope everyone will leave this conference with greater confidence in the government's actions and genuine desire to confront the housing crisis, to create good communities supported by the infrastructure they need, with people connected to more diverse job opportunities than Western Sydney has ever seen before. Thanks for your time, thanks for your interest, and thanks for the ongoing conversation with the government. And thanks for arriving just on time.
Thank you, Paul. Christopher Brown, Chairman of the Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue. Thank you, and thank you to not only the traditional owners for hosting us, but for the modern guardians in Campbelltown City Council. Just have a chat to Paul. Just firstly, I think a date worth mentioning. This year is 50 years since Gough Whitlam announced the Macarthur Development Corporation, the first time a federal government had really co-invested in state infrastructure. What an appropriate time, what an appropriate anniversary for the Prime Minister, hopefully before the election, to announce the Metro will be coming to Campbelltown from the airport. And I think this room has to get behind that rallying call. We have to help make state and federal government make the commitment. The government has quite rightly said, last government, current government, the future of Sydney is Metro. Well, that means if you're not on the Metro, you're not in Sydney's future, quite simply. We can no longer have Campbelltown not in Sydney's future if Metro is the link. So it's really important. That's the obvious extension from the airport down through Oran Park. Similarly, you make an argument to extend it to Liverpool at the same time, but I think Oran Park's likely to be first. So you'll hear a lot more from us over this next 6 months to ensure the election does include that. And an apology, I think, to the people of Campbelltown that we in the Western Sydney area, not only the dialogue, but all of the advocates for Western Sydney have had a pretty good job, a lot of success in the northwestern part of Sydney. Parramatta is booming. Penrith, Blacktown coming off the back of that. There is the infrastructure. Surely the focus for us all now is not the lack of trying. We've all got to be better at making sure the southwest now enjoys the same thing that the central west of Sydney has got over the past 10 or 15 years. And I think events like this today and support of the groups here and the ministers like Paul and the 3 mega public servants you're going to hear from after that have a chance to do it. But so do we in the private sector, so do we in the third sector. It's not only government's responsibility, we've all got a role to play. So maybe we'll have a quick chat to Paul about that, and then we'll move on with those who he'll put in charge of actually delivering it. So, thank you, Paul. I said there's about conference on housing about number 500 since you took over the portfolio.
Oh, there's been a couple. There's strong interest, but the interest is positive as well, which is important. I think it's easy for people to see that some people have had a negative response to it. You know, it's local government election season, so you might expect that. But I do want to, I do want to acknowledge George again in terms of the positive approach he's taken to our engagement with this. There's a lot. There's a lot more people out there who want to get on and recognise that they are part of the solution than not.
To that point, we're just back from East London. We took a delegation of Western Sydney leaders, public sector, Landcom and Transport and others, as well as private sector and academics, etc., to our fraternal home of East London. Very similar, Western Sydney, East London, very similar in almost everything. One thing we're not so similar in is the sheer scale they do things in London. Now, you would rightly say you've flicked the switch to scale instantly. I'd just go further because that's my want. Is there more scale? Where's the Battersea Power Station thing? Where's the Canary Wharfs? Where at that scale, is Sydney just not ready for that scale? Or under the Todds and others, is there scope for the private sector to come back to you and say, that was good ambition, we want to double what you want to do? Is there that appetite in government to take scale led from local or global players? We've got Aussie Super developing Canada Water and thing, but not developing anything in Sydney. How do we get sovereign wealth funds, superannuation funds to come in, back you in, and take your ambition to twice as big?
I think some of the first part you've got to do is open up the order book. I mean, we've created probably the biggest order book for housing in New South Wales for decades. That's not without its own challenges to get that going. And you've got to remember that some of those have only just come into effect. So, I mean, the last round of ABS stats didn't even include a period where some of those new planning reforms have come into effect. But we've got to also make sure, a bit like the make sure enabling infrastructure is there ready to go to support the development. We've got to make sure the systems are in place to support that as well. Now, that's not making an excuse, but that's making sure that if someone does come along with that ambition and a great idea, that we're ready to go. Now, I think the work that between Tom and Kirsten and others in the government that will be done over the next little while will enable some of that sort of stuff to happen. Will enable, and we hope that we are able to generate that. We hope that we are. There is more, and there certainly is early interest from institutional investors, and we hope that there's more of that to come.
So let's get serious. You're a serious fellow. Let's do some serious numbers. By the next 20 years, the LGAs, the 3 or 4 LGAs around where we are now, are going to welcome, by most moderate and conservative projections, another 363,000 people. by 2041. Pardon my French, that's a shitload of homes we're going to have to build. I don't think anybody in this room thinks we'll probably do it. I think there's a sense of this is Sydney, we'll always find a reason to hold back. How close do you think we get? How much more drive is needed? How much more red tape broken, private investment needed, infrastructure, whatever? And that's just the homes. That's not the schools. You announced staying well on proof for getting the Gregory Hill School. Should not have taken that long, last government. How will we in any way muster to get construction costs down, the labour supply, the blue metal, the steel, the wood, the red tape? How close do you think we get?
Yeah, thank you for summarising the challenges that keep me up at night. I really appreciate it.
I put a bloke from Wollongong in charge with tough buggers in housing.
But look, yes, it is a big number. It is an ambitious target, but we should have ambition. We're New South Wales. Sydney is Australia's global city. We've got to be like that. We've got to make sure that we're acting like that. We've got to back that in. For the past few years, when it comes to housing completions per 1,000 head of population, we've been coming in after Victoria and Queensland. We're the biggest state. We're going to have some of those significant pieces of infrastructure there. We're going to have to back ourselves in. And that's why our housing reforms aren't focused on just the 5 years of the housing accord period. Because, as you rightly point out, there's going to be someone who wants a home on the 1st of July 2029, and we're going to have to make sure that's able to be delivered. So the planning reforms we're putting in place actually have a pretty long tail. They're out to the 10 to the 15-year mark. Now, if they deliver a whole lot quicker, great, and we'll continue to look for opportunities. But we'll also continue to look for opportunities of how that works along that, what would be just best described as that new arc of economic activity and opportunity, which sort of goes Wollongong. I started Wollongong for purely parochial reasons, absolutely parochial reasons. But it runs Wollongong through the southwest of Sydney, Western Sydney, and up to the Hunter. That's going to be some significant change, right? Between now and 2040, you're going to see a fair bit of change in the Hunter. You're seeing a fair bit of change in the Illawarra. You're going to see a lot of change in southwestern Sydney. We've just got to make sure that we're doing that thoroughly, it's well planned, it's properly done, and all of the bits that come along with homes, so we don't have another Gregory Hill situations, come along with that as well.
So a couple of specific regulatory stuff. I know it's Tom Gellibrand's job now to get housing, water, transport in a room, or planning, water, transport in the room, that any private developer will say, I'll get 2 out of the 3, but there's always one of the 3 that, so you've given Tom the job. Good luck, Tom, of having them all knock their heads together and so.
Well, I got the job as well because we've got a subcommittee of cabinet. So between the Premier and I, we get the ministerial groups and the secretaries in the room as well. So we're trying to help Tom and work with him in that endeavour, because we recognise that we need to do this integration of agencies better. Yeah. It's okay. It's fantastic. We might be able to crank out some more development application approvals more speedy. That's great. Absolutely has to be done. But if you look at it and you look at the stage of development, a third in that assessment and approval stage, a third in the post-approval consents, and a third in financing, and a third in construction, we've got to make sure that middle part is working well as well, and that's a real focus, because that's where things can take much longer than what they should.
A couple of granular things to finish on how you get there to help that. I was just asking Tom briefly. I didn't put the question on properly, but the simply cost of construction is now. You can do all the regulatory changes of the world you like, and regulation's one of those costs, but so does labour supply, blue metal, wood, timber, you name it. The cost of construction is now making it, and the land costs of Western Sydney have come up. In the old days, cheap land, build the same. So in the eastern suburbs, or expensive land, construction cost is the same, but you can sell at a premium. There's a challenge of how we actually get the private sector to still be able to develop profitably in this region. So things like construction costs would be someone in the process. I'm sure someone is looking at how you help an industry manage through that. Little one too, I know you've got a bit of reform on your desk. You've got to look at the land lease living. The government's very keen on modular housing, so are we. Western Sydney should be the place where we build modular housing in Australia and for the region. But the regulatory, those land lease living type developments is one option where we can actually try and bring housing supply forward quickly. Are you confident that those sort of smaller regulatory stuff will be addressed to open up all the opportunities for development?
Oh, we have to be open to
You can't currently do them in Western Sydney, I think.
No,
that's
no,
the
no.
exclusion.
Well, yeah, you can't. That was many years ago. But some of the land lease stuff and the modular housing stuff does get caught up with some regulations with respect of caravans and how they're done. And no one's looked at that for 30 years.
Another legacy item.
Yeah, no one's looked at it for 30 years. And we're having a look at that at the moment so that there's not a weird regulatory zone that you go into that shouldn't apply anymore or doesn't make sense in the current context. So yes, we've already started earlier this week. The Premier, Minister Jackson, and I announced the first 8 sites to do some modular housing trials within social housing. It's not revolutionary in terms of the number, but it's a start to get that going, because we've also, if you're going to go down that path, you need to build an industry at the same time. But there are other builders, more traditional builders, that are looking at this form of modern methods of construction to go forward. So we need to be open to all of these ideas. We need to be open to these new approaches. Some of them will work, others won't be appropriate and may not. But that doesn't mean we should have a closed mind. Yeah, that's right. We're genuinely having a look at everything we can do. And I think when it comes to construction costs and labour, we've got a big pipeline of skills investment through TAFE at both a state and a federal level, because if you're a Sparky in the future, you're going to make a fortune, whether it be renewable energy or housing, to make sure that's happening. So we need the skilled labour. We need to make sure that there is the construction costs and the materials costs are starting to plateau. But there's also going to be a shift too from some of those larger infrastructure projects, the non-residential projects, into some more residential construction in time too.
Quick one to finish. I know you're not you're a humble fellow from Wollongong, and legacy isn't your personal legacy isn't your driving thing, but it's 50 years since Gough not only set up the MacArthur Development Corporation, but put federal money into the sewerage system of Western Sydney. As he said, he came, he
left it flushed.
He left it fully flushed. Gough. 50 years time, I think 50 years time, you look back on the past coalition government, you'll say they gave a bit of confidence back to planning. They had big strategic planning, big spinal infrastructure, were a little light on the OPEX, good on the CapEx, not flash on the OPEX. Hospital, yes. Nurses, no. Schools, yes, some extent. Teachers, no. And not so good on the delivery. And I know you've taken that up as delivery. It's probably a less glorious ambition. I feel sorry for you. You get to fill in the bit, and they started. What do you think, looking back 50 years' time, we look back at the Minns, Scully era, what will they be what would you hope they'd be talking about?
Look, I'd hope that they were looking at.
First, I hope they remember you, but
yeah, that's always good. Well, for a positive reason rather than a negative. Some planning ministers are remembered for the negative. Look, I'd hope that they were looking back on an era where, yes, the previous government had made some significant investments in those transport spines. We have not criticised them for that. We think that it was the right thing to do.
Not so much with funding the rapid bus transit.
Yeah, that's right. But I think it's a case of, I hope that people look back and see that this was the point at which we changed that direction on how we do housing in Sydney, and recognise that we can't continue to go out week to week to week, ever expanding outwards, because we run into some problems. I mean, Sydney has some great challenges we have to deal with when it comes to the housing. We've got great national parks in the north and the south and the west.
Rivers.
We've got a great harbour that's in the middle. So we've got a very different profile than, say, a Melbourne or other parts. It's what makes Sydney great. It's what we've been able to embrace, but it does make for a challenging environment in that sense. So I think that's a time when Sydney started its next evolution of maturity, because cities aren't museums.
Well, I think in 50 years they'll say at least he gave it a red hot go. Could you please thank the Minister for Planning and Public Spaces, Honourable Paul Scully.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Chris.
That's great.